So welcome everyone to the first meeting for the Unicorn Project. I think we have a quorum, so we're just going to go ahead and get started. I guess briefly go around. So I'm Ben Hong. I'm on the Montano team. I guess we can just go around in case everyone doesn't know each other.
Yeah, I'm Emily Sherrio. I'm an internal strategy consultant on the chief of staff team, but before that, I was on the data team here at GitLab. So, Simon?
I'm Simon Mansfield. I am a solutions architect for enterprise here in EMEA. And over to Derek.
Sure, my name is Derek. I, along with Ben, I'm on the Montano team, senior front-end engineer as well. Guess I should hand that off my bad. James.
Hey folks, I'm James Heimbuck, senior product manager on the testing team in the verify stage. I'll hand it off to Brad.
Hey, how's it going? Brad Downey. I'm on the enterprise sales team in California.
Awesome. Yeah, so just before a lot of you joined, Simon and Emily and I were talking about how none of us had actually read the Phoenix Project before the Unicorn Project. So we all basically just read the Phoenix Project and then read the Unicorn Project. So I don't know if anyone else here had just done the same thing, but I know the three of us have.
I have not read the Phoenix Project. So yeah, I also didn't realize it was fiction.
It feels so real.
I'm not gonna lie, when I bought the books and then I just assumed differently, and then I got them, I'm like, oh, this is a little bit different than I anticipated.
I've never heard of Parts Unlimited. Where is this mythical company?
I'm going to be super curious, Derek, to see how you read this differently from the folks who just read the Phoenix Project.
Yeah.
Because, if you just read it, you just saw the happy ending, and I can see how the two stories kind of are fitting together, not perfectly, and he covers that a little bit in the foreword, but they definitely they're supposed to be two sides of a similar coin, and I'm really excited to see any differences that you pick up as you read it.
Sure, I hope I don't let you down.
Yeah, I'm interested as well to see if we maybe, with the prior knowledge of what's happened in the Phoenix Project, when we get to a certain reading point, kind of know what's going on and maybe a bit more, because we know what's going on in the Phoenix Project at that timeline. I really want to look at the timeline in the back of the book that tells you where everything's going on, but I don't want to because I know it's going to have spoilers in it. So,
yeah, it's been a couple of years since I've read the Phoenix Project, and I started reading on the plane on Sunday, and it literally took me until chapter 5 to figure out, oh, this is happening same time as the Phoenix Project, not a sequel after. And I in my head, I just had it as it's a sequel, so obviously it's happening after. And then all these events started sounding really familiar. I almost want to go back and start again and just read day by day on both sides of it, because it's split by the days, and be on September, whatever, this happened, and then flip over to the other book, and on September, whatever, this happened, and try reading it that way. Because I'm through, I guess, part 1 at this point, but I want to go back and sync up those days just to get a better understanding of what's happening on both sides.
That would be really cool too, because the Phoenix Project is very much from a leadership perspective, and this is from an IC perspective in a lot of ways. It's not a first-person narrative, but it definitely has that omniscient knowledge.
James, you sharing that just made me think exactly what Emily just said is leadership thinking it's go, 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 everything's cool, and at the contributor level, it's no, there's things that need to be resolved properly before we really embark on this, because this is a big thing, big bite we're taking off. So it's interesting.
One difference, and I'm probably 3 years away from the time when I read Phoenix Project, but one thing which I see different between these books is I was thinking Phoenix Project is having this ops perspective of running an existing system in an efficient way. And this one is obviously based about developing a new system, so it's more development focused. But in both of them, there is this persona of Eric, who is eventually coming up with the magical wand and giving them hints and helping them get through that. And I was reading through this book, I was almost thinking, when is Eric popping up and doing his magic? When is that going to happen? And eventually, chapter 7.
I was going to say, skipping forward a few chapters here, but I do love how Eric's introduced. It's fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Like that was definitely a really nice way of just dropping him in. But yeah, I think chapter 1, like, so the first thing that I was like, I take from chapter 1 is basically Maxine getting blamed for something that really kind of outside of her control. And I've definitely been there as a developer. Like, something's gone wrong and it's gone wrong in production. It's like, yeah, okay, I changed that line, but like 17 other people have looked at it between there and then, and you know, no one else picked up on it.
And she was on PTO too, right? Didn't she like come back and
yeah,
was it, I forget where, but like she turned her phone on and totally blew up, and like I've had that experience personally.
Yeah, I'm glad kind of we don't have any site reliability engineers on the call, because I think they'd probably very much understand that kind of that issue. But yeah, like I think first chapter was just like like hit the nail on the head for me. It's like there's so many times when I was a developer that I used to get blamed for things that were like just not my control. Things not even necessarily I've even touched. It's just, and it's like sometimes you get blamed for things that it was like, oh, didn't you know that you were meant to do this? It's like, no, it was never written down, which is again another continuing theme of this book. You know, like, how was I meant to do that? Oh, well, you know, you're just meant to know. Like, everybody does that. Okay, well, where is it documented? Yeah. So that was kind of interesting.
I'm curious what how, when I read the Phoenix Project, I used to work at a place that was super dysfunctional, and the whole time I was reading it, I was just like, oh, this was us. Like, we had Thursday night releases, weekly releases, and all of Friday was always spent doing hot fixes. It was like, I wish I'd read the book sooner because it was like a page out of the place I used to work. But I'm curious, I wasn't on the dev team at that point in time, but I could see what was happening. I'm curious if people felt similarly at all around as they read this.
I'll jump in. Yeah, like absolutely nail on head for my previous company, to the point at which I'm half tempted to give the CEO of the last company a Christmas present of the book, but I'm not sure if it's going to strike a nerve or not. Maybe someone else can interject as to.
Yeah, I can. So I worked at, it was 2 places ago, but Schweitz Engineering Laboratories was a very corporate place, and they have 5,000 employees now. So I was seeing a lot of parallels with respect to, it sounds like, again, what Emily was saying earlier about the Phoenix Project, in that that's the perspective from leadership and not so much knowing kind of really what's going on, and people being afraid to speak up more so than when they really should. But the culture itself was kind of, like, don't do that, right? Like that kind of general vibe and atmosphere, which is terrible, right? Obviously. So yeah, that was definitely a parallel for sure.
It's interesting what you're saying, because I had that feeling like this is maybe a little bit caricatural, like overdrawn, all those problems, that my first thought, like, well, this can't be this bad anywhere anymore in the world. But of course, apparently it can, right?
So yeah, I'll bring up one example. So there was this huge, so the company is like 35 years old, private company, very successful in their own right, but yeah, in terms of like processes, right, compared to like GitLab, for example, but even the place I was at after, like way behind in just how they do things, right? And one of their, so I think it's how they take product orders, I forget what it is, but however they enter the data, like it has to be in all caps. Like, I'm dead serious. Like, I don't know what the legacy system, I don't know what the deal is, but that was always an issue downstream, obviously, of anybody that needed to get that information. But so that was, I think, one of the main reasons why they punted for so long to do like a full, I think it was ERP system. I forget what the acronym is, but to basically modernize how they do everything. And so it's they create industrialized computers and digital relays. So like managing all the parts in manufacturing, like that whole thing, I think that was the system they needed to upgrade to. And they punted on it for so long because they just knew how painful it was going to be. So I haven't even got to the point where obviously I guess it is painful in the Phoenix project right now, but I just again saw parallels of like that whole process. Like it didn't go well at all. So yeah, I guess that's another piece. Scary knowing that it's going to be a tough challenge, but then eventually ripping that Band-Aid off and just starting to go. It has to be done sometime, but ideally things would be in a better spot prior to doing so, and that was not the case. And I can add one other little nugget, like I forget the exact system or whatever, but yeah, basically like a leadership was, they didn't have the developers in the room essentially to like say that whether this was a good idea or not. And they made the decision, and then he ended up later down the line, because things went really bad, they kind of almost did what they did with Maurice, I think is her name, and kind of shipped her off to another, far place. And yeah, it's very real, very real.
Much to Mikhail's disgust, it's real.
It's scary.
It's very scary.
It's scary, right?
I wonder how many of us have been in situations as well where we've arrived as a developer on a project or a new project or as part of a new team, and then you spend that first 2 weeks just desperately trying to get something to build. Like that seems to be that's like normality as far as I'm concerned. I mean, not here at GitLab, but I'm not a developer here, so. But yeah, in pretty much every previous role I've had, like you always just arrive and it's like trying to figure out what tools are used, what libraries are being used, what dependencies, how do you build all this stuff? How does it get deployed? That just seems like, I wouldn't even say that's particularly uncommon. I don't know what other people's thoughts are.
Yeah, I'll say. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I don't know if it was anybody else, but like maybe because I'm in sales, but I was screaming like, "You need GitLab!" Like I'm literally like listening to all the because the problem statements are building, right? And I'm like, "Oh my god, why don't they have GitLab? When are they gonna put GitLab in? Like they need GitLab." It's like I just was pushing so many parallels there. Like I could solve that problem.
That's super funny. I really appreciate that you had that thought, but I'll say I had it too, and I'm not in sales. One thing that I did come to appreciate, so when the data team started hiring kind of more folks outside, I think like between our second and third hire after me, I took a day and I spent time writing an onboarding script that configured their laptops the way we wanted it configured. And so it's like, we actually encourage folks to do it pretty early on in their GitLab onboarding process, because it installed Homebrew and it installed Git, and we help you set up like the clone to the project and everything that you needed to be successful. And one of the reasons I think it was so useful, like all the tools we use in the data stack, but one of the reasons I think it really makes a difference is because it brings to the table that everyone's working in the same environment, and which is exactly what she's trying to solve for. And I think I wonder if that itself is somehow scalable beyond like just teams. Like I know certain teams do this, but like, is there something we can do to make it easier for everyone when they join GitLab to set up their computers with all the right things?
I mean, you can do that. We, at previous companies, especially for developer boxes, like there's like a build that would, or a script that was stored in source control that you would download and you would run, and it was basically a build script that would download and install and configure your laptop for development to get all those tools set up. So it was maintained within the dev group, so that as things changed, they would go back and update that that cookbook. I think it was a chef cookbook actually, to get things updated. I think the thing that's always missing though is like everybody comes in with their own tool belt of what they love to use and why they love to use it. And so it's missing like context of we use this because, and if you get that context of like why we're using this particular tool because of the way it works with our stack, then you avoid a lot of mistakes potentially that you would make of trying to use your own widget, because that's what you know, against that tool. And you can save yourself some headaches. Now, it gets you way further ahead than if you come in from scratch and you have a standard IT issue for accounting laptop that's just beefy with RAM and processor, than having to build everything yourself. But there's still, I think, there's opportunity there to add things to, like scripts like that, or things that set up any sort of environment that add that context of why we do it this way.
I wonder what is your experience in this way, but I come from an ops background, but I've been dealing with this problem in my previous job. And one of the ways we set the boundary to kind of let people freedom, use whatever they want, but minimize the impact on the application, was by essentially enforcing Docker containers on everything we built. And then if it's a application dependency, it must go into the Docker file, and then it's documented and it's in the repo, and everybody uses the same thing. If it's something which is a developer tool on developer machine, then I mean, people were free to use whatever made them productive. Of course, there was some RubyMine license for everybody to use to have something to start with. But if you have any kind of extra tools, you know, like Postman, like stuff which you like to use for testing API, that's something which you can grab yourself. Postman was free back in the day. I'm not sure if it still is. So this and that shows in that book as well, that their application is a monolith. So obviously no one knows how to even start building this, because it got so complex, and no one even tries to kind of get it built on a regular basis. That's why I thought this is so heavily dysfunctional. But on the developer productivity way, I wonder. That was the question in the beginning. I wonder what is your experience, but I think Docker goes a long way to make the build process streamlined and just easier to understand.
Yeah, I'm really interested. Sorry, I'm really interested as well. Is like the difference I see between the Phoenix project book and the Unicorn project is time has passed. So I know that they're set at the same time, but I've already seen references to Kubernetes, and I've already seen references to Docker in this book. I didn't see any of that in the Phoenix project. Now, you could argue that they're talking about different things, but you would, you know, if the Phoenix project was rewritten now, I think there would be more talk about Kubernetes. There was talk about virtualization, and that was definitely like.
Well, I think they called that out.
Yeah. In the beginning, he asks people to suspend, like he acknowledges time's past. We talk about different technologies now just because of that. I think the foreword.
Yeah, no, I know he does, but I mean, it's really interesting that obviously that is, he's coming into this book and immediately he's talking about Docker and Kubernetes, and it's like, yeah, these are going to be the tools that you're going to use to solve this problem, or at least in part anyway. I know what Michael is saying, and I completely agree. Like, yeah, developer environments, you know, doing it in Docker makes sense. The problem that I always have as a developer and working on some large teams and managing some teams was that every developer is different. So there's some things you just cannot get them to agree on. So like, yeah, you could go and install Git, the command line version, because, you know, I think at GitLab, we're probably pretty okay with choosing Git over something like SVN. But if you install Vim automatically for your developers, that's a feisty argument you're going to have later on down the line. And then conversely, if you install VS Code, same thing. So there's a fine line, I think, with especially developers, as to how much you can kind of pre-install. I think the tooling that supports the builds and stuff, fine, but as soon as you start talking about development environments and things that are more personal and you know, you have to take everything with a pinch of salt. You don't really want to install that stuff for them because they're like that.
I mean, we talk a lot about tooling right now, but it seems to me, having read the Phoenix project and now the Unicorn project, that communication is a huge issue. There's this great analogy they have where they talk at watermelon projects, green on the outside, but red on the inside. And so it's just this funny, you know, this sort of red, yellow, green check-in, and that a lot of times like leadership wants to like project that things are going well, while the individual contributors know just how disastrous things are going. And it's funny how much cognitive dissonance people use to resolve those things. They're like, it's fine, you know, IT just needs to pull their weight. Marketing did their job, like, and it's just insane. Yeah, it's just the fact that people work like this is just crazy.
Yeah, that, and also like the fact that there's just such a blame culture going on there. Like, it's always somebody else's fault. and dare I say it, and I think that's partly down to the fact that when there is someone who is at fault, or they spot something that is bad, they're reluctant to say, hey, actually, we've got a problem, and it's all about this not wanting to discuss. It's got to be somebody else's problem. It can't possibly be yours. So, it's always better to shift the blame onto someone else than it is to go, oh, actually, like the ops team, yeah, we have a problem here.
Actually, sorry, go on.
Go for it.
I wanted to say that I've been selling in a company who was doing agile implementation for commerce systems, actually. So a little bit like in the book. And one of the toughest part of the process, which you mentioned, is how do you sell an agile project? Because of course, in the end, the decision needs to go down to the development team to decide on how complex things are and what is going to fit into the sprint. But you still need to tell the customer something in the beginning. What is the expectation? And the way we did it was you try to have a backlog of like 2 or 3 sprints quantified with the weights on the issues and everything. And you never communicate the weights or towards the customer because they are not meant for that. But there must be a guy, and typically that's the architect on the team, who has enough balls to say, look, here is the scope. 70% of this we commit to deliver within a given time frame and budget, and 30% is our best effort, and we'll do our best to deliver, but there might be some complexities which can put that in jeopardy. And this guy is essentially taking all the responsibility on him personally, because he cannot rely on what the development team will tell him about especially in the beginning of a project. You don't know velocity, you don't know how the team works together just yet. You're ramping up. So selling is then complex of this thing. I mean, it takes gut and experience in the end.
Yeah, one thing that I wanted to say just with respect to the concept of blame and ownership and that type of thing is going back to that same company I mentioned earlier. One thing they did that I think was very interesting, but I'm starting to reflect that maybe it didn't permeate throughout the entire company simply because of size, maybe like the scale of them being thousands and thousands of people. That's kind of my gut at the moment, but I have no idea. But one thing that I think they did really well is on Fridays, they would have what is called Friday lunch. So similar to what we have here in that we have the kind of the company-wide meeting, right? Except it was everybody in the entire organization, whether you're on the various campuses, you're streaming in, right? Like watching it on a web video or whatever. But what they had is, again, because a big part of its manufacturing is there'd be called red lights. Like that's actually stopping manufacturing, right? There's a serious issue. And, people are losing money, essentially, is kind of what it comes down to. But what they would do is they do kind of retros of like, we had our red light last month or whatever it was, and this is what went wrong. This is how we got to root cause. So that was actually really good. But I think I'm just reading that, and my gut is that because the company was so large that maybe it didn't connect with everybody as much, but that was something that I thought was really awesome. And it was definitely something unique that I'd never experienced in my career before. So that whole Friday lunch thing was really cool. It was like, here's like everybody in the company, this is kind of what's going on. It was also a free lunch, so people like that part, right, as well. But it was I think they were doing a good job, but I just don't know if it totally worked all the way, I guess.
Well, and to Mikhail's point is that, like, with sales, you're saying that, you want to sort of like sell features, right? And as you're iterative, it's hard to sometimes determine when that end date is. And so I think, at least in the book, it's very clear that there's an issue with departments existing in silos and almost being competitive with each other. Like, marketing's doing well, but IT sucks. It's like, well, IT and marketing should probably just be really buddy-buddy, because then marketing can be like, look, we want to push these things, and IT can at least, again, I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the fourth idea was psychological safety, right? Where it's quoted like, where you make it safe to talk about problems because solving problems requires prevention, which requires honesty, and honesty requires an absence of fear. And, especially in the the Unicorn Project, there's such a like scapegoat. Like, if something goes wrong, we cut someone, axe someone. So no wonder why everyone's promising to get these things done, because they don't want to be the next one, like, they're talking about the whole culture being like a game of Survivor. Like who's gonna last one more day.
I'm totally with you. It's a chicken and egg problem, right? If the trust comes from keeping commitments, and the lack of security comes from broken commitments, and you need to break that chain somewhere.
Yeah, and to Ben's point there, like if people are getting axed because of something goes wrong, or they get shunned into some area, within the company that doesn't have a lot of resources or attention or whatever, it's like, that's scary, right? People that are then naturally probably gonna like withhold information as opposed to speak up when they should, and that's obviously a bad situation to get into.
I thought this idea of the rebellion was really interesting.
So many pop cultures in this book.
Star Wars puns, totally.
There's Harry Potter too.
Yeah. Star Trek puns as well. Red shirts.
I had to have those explained to me. But I thought it was really interesting. I mean, they formed like this formal, informal group in the rebellion, but this idea of how you get things done is based on who you have previous connections to.
Yeah, the worrying thing about the rebellion for me is it's who you know, not what you know, isn't it? And it's I mean, they're very clever in the fact that they've got at this point, they've got a fairly broad range of people in different areas of the company. So they've got enough people from different areas who are all sufficiently fed up with how things are going so far that they're prepared to give it a punt at trying something different. But yeah, I have to be honest, I've never been part of a rebellion group at a company. That's a new one on me.
And they're reinforcing the whole teams issue as opposed to it being an entire team and silos of teams. So they're kind of reinforcing that, actually.
Yeah, I mean, what they're doing a good job is, I guess, they're kind of creating their first agile group of like complete end to end, so planning to deployment type, style stuff.
But no, I was going to say for Simon and Emily, were you the ones that was I the only one who was like, oh, that's where Brent is like going all his time, like because you were just at the Phoenix, you're like, oh, that's why he's breaking stuff, because he's at the rebellion doing this kind of crap.
Yeah, like in the Phoenix project, obviously Brent disappears quite a lot and is also the main point of contact. So it was hilarious when they were at their meeting and his phone's going off and he's like, I've got to go, and then he comes back and then he has to go again. It's like, yeah, okay, I see what's going on here, but it is kind of funny that like I never would have put Brent as one of the rebellion guys, but it was interesting that they went there because
was he the only cross character? I mean, other than some of the bigger names like
no, so
CEO,
on
and all that.
Chris on that page, basically every single person with a dot next to their name is a cross person. So there's quite a lot of them. So Brent, William, Wes, Patty, Steve, Dick, Sarah, Chris, Kirsten, Maggie, Bill, John, Bob, and Eric. So.
But Brent is the one that's made a recurring. Like the other ones just kind of make appearances. But
I mean, Eric's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Albeit in a very.
Kirsten is starting to make a recurring appearance, I think.
Yeah, I think she's going to be. She wasn't really in the Phoenix Project all that much, though, was she?
I couldn't remember.
She was mostly there in like, she's the head of project management, but she wasn't like an active character. I don't think we ever heard any of her thoughts or reactions to things, but she was a player. And I feel like now she's actually being pulled into the story.
Yeah, I think she's going to be a pretty major part of this story. I do love that at the end, like part one is basically like, yeah, you guys go off and try this group, but I'm not going to associate myself with you. Oh, so basically we could all get fired, but you'll fight. Yeah, pretty much. You just go and do your thing. I did like that at the end.
I will say what I missed a little bit is in the Phoenix Project, Eric does this really piecemeal, like let Bill like have like his light bulb moment for the various ideals. Yeah. And then this one, he just sort of like drops all of them at once. And you're just like, wait, hold on. Wait a second. Yeah. What's going on?
He was literally saying like, oh, this is the first ideal. And I was like, oh, this is going to be a long drawn out process for you guys to figure out the rest. And then he's like, oh, I've got a long queue at the bar. I don't have time to argue. Boom. Here's the rest of them. Boom, done.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting because the Phoenix Project kind of was one of the very first kind of DevOps-y books that I ever read, and it kind of opened my mind to flow and all this stuff. And I ended up reading like a lot of probably more traditional books like Elijah Goldrat's book, right, from the 80s, and
The Goal.
The Goal, yeah, thank you. So like, and they're so similar, in terms of their structure. Like, they're really going to walk you through every element of it. Yeah, and in the Unicorn Project, it was just not that. It was, yeah, here they all are, boom, 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 and then they go back and kind of recall them later on in the book, but it just wasn't the same.
Yeah, I'm hoping they do a bit more, because at least I felt with the Phoenix Project, I felt the pain of each one, and then when Bill realizes it, there's like, the learning was a bit more effective. So I'm hoping he goes back and does that, because otherwise, again, we all know platitudes. Like, it's easy to spout platitudes. It's another to really gain that, like, more or less like firsthand experience as you watch someone go through it.
Has anyone else read Accelerate?
I did.
What is that?
It's from the Dora group. It was a book explaining like the last couple of DevOps reports and really digging into the science of it and the connections of how some things lead to other things. And I feel like Eric at the bar could have just said, hey, y'all should go read Accelerate, because that is what I'm going to be talking about. It's from, I think Gene was part of the group that wrote that, along with Nicole and Jez and a couple other folks. Great book, highly recommended. But yeah, it felt like that was this is all leading up to just summing up Accelerate, it feels like to me.
I can't remember. It's on my list. Like, I think that is she the one that worked for Nordstrom, Nicole?
She was I don't know if she ever worked at Nordstrom, doing her own thing as a researcher, and then Dora got acquired by Google. So they're within Google Cloud at this point.
Okay, maybe that's not the one. I'm trying to think of the one that I couldn't make it through. It was just too boring. But it was by the woman. I really wanted to read it. It was the one by the woman who worked for Nordstrom. Anyways, I'll look it up.
I'm curious about the business fable structure as opposed to like a traditional business book structure. This is totally personal, but do you prefer it? Does it make it easier or harder to read?
I liked it for the first time. Go on.
I mean, I think I prefer it to like if you wrote down this information as a non-fiction book, I think it would be very dry, and it would be very hard to make it interesting if it's entirely non-fiction. So I think putting it in a fictional environment is actually really interesting. Plus also, I know it's a fictional solution to a problem, but it actually does show kind of a real world use, if that makes sense. It's not real world, but it feels like it.
I'm with you, Simon, for readability. I felt it very easy and smooth on the Phoenix project. Now going through Unicorn project, I feel slightly annoyed that I know that the story is essentially the same one, just from different perspective. I feel like rereading the similar story from different angle, which is just uncomfortable. But I'm with you, Simon, that it's way easier to remember this way because it's a story and people remember stories.
Have you read other business fables?
No.
Do you have anything?
Well, the goal is written that way, which I found really, really interesting.
Yeah, and Goldrat wrote like 3 or 4 more in that same style.
Yeah, like I don't remember the other ones. Like Beyond the Goal is more business focused, but I think there's a Beyond Phoenix project too. But Goal and Phoenix projects are very, very similar, just totally different time periods and different technologies, but very similar business lessons and all about flow and automation and things. So I found it fascinating.
Patrick Lencioni has a bunch of like organizational leadership fables. If you haven't heard of him, he does a lot of stuff. I'll drop the link in chat.
Yeah.
Just at a high level, this is all news to me. Like I said, I thought it was nonfiction to begin with. When I purchased it, I thought it was nonfiction. Then I opened the book. I'm like, oh, this is a little bit different. So it sounds like it's a little bit. These types of books exist more than I realized. But I think it's a cool approach. Obviously, like as I forget who just mentioned it, but yeah, people typically remember stories, not stats, right? That whole idea. So that structure I think makes sense from an author perspective. Seems like it would be more successful potentially, or have more opportunity to be successful.
I'm really interested to see, like, Derek, what's your opinion of some of the characters in the book? So, like, what's your opinion of Bill, and what's your opinion of Sarah? Because those of us that have read the Phoenix Project know a lot more about them.
So I'm terrible with the names, so that's a problem. But Sarah, she's the head of VP, or she's the VP of product management.
Sorry, sales. Yeah.
Is Bill also leadership role?
IT.
IT. Well, I guess the only thing that kind of comes to mind at a high level is seeing the emails from like the execs down, essentially, to across the company. Like, again, being at Schweitzer Engineering, like it being very corporate, I could just kind of see some parallels in the actual content of the emails. It's for shareholders, right? And we are a business, like those kind of like threads. Like that is true. There's no escaping that. And unfortunately, the workforce, the ICs are, kind of replaceable to some extent at a very high level, right? So it's like that part I could just see parallels with respect to, again, where I was at previously, but just generally, companies have to make money. They're a business to solve a particular problem or a set of problems, and those customers, those users, either pay for it or not, and the product itself gets less useful over time as maybe a new product surfaces. But yeah, I guess that's kind of the definitely the emails. I like again, kind of from the story aspect too. I think that's kind of an interesting approach, right? It's like I could just instantly. I don't recall any specific emails like that, but I know it happened. And sometimes obviously they get exposed in the public, right? When there's a private internal email. So that whole vibe was kind of there. I thought that was kind of interesting. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing from my perspective is, I think when I was reading the Phoenix Project and they decided that they were going to launch the Phoenix Project on X day, it was like, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? And I had that entire sense of, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? The second time round reading the Unicorn Project. It's literally like a roller coaster that's just not finished. And you're like, why are you getting on this? It's going to end badly for you.
Yeah, and it obviously turned out, again, didn't read Phoenix Project, but with the Unicorn Project, it's like, yeah, you're going to launch in a week or 2 days later, or whatever it was. It's like, yeah, right. We can't even do a build. It's just obvious that because it's fiction, maybe you're like, maybe some miracle will occur, but it's highly unlikely. And then you learn pages later, no, this is a shitstorm. It's not going to happen.
It's just like also the sheer disregard they have for when IT is like, this is not feasible. And they're like, no, you just got to pull your weight. I'm like, yep, that hits a little close to home. That sucks.
It can't be done. Oh, no, you've just got to burn the midnight oil. Hate that.
Yeah, the lack of foresight and leadership to really grasp how impactful this actually is, because obviously each of the actual physical stores, right, they had to start taking orders by hand or whatever, right, because their systems were down. It's like, and then the trickle storm of that is just ridiculous. So it's extremely painful to read. Thankfully it's fictional, so it's not that bad, but I guarantee there are stories like this out in the world, right, that they made bad decisions from leadership, handed down, forced down, decided, and the implementers just have to implement, and it's not ready, and bad things happen.
So we might have a release go bad, but anytime we have something not go great, I always think about the press conference I saw after healthcare.gov launched and thinking to myself, at least I'm not that product manager. Like, I don't have to get out in front of the country and tell them that my software is bad and explain that we tried really hard, but yeah, it's really bad.
Yeah, that's a good reminder. And the amount of money that went into the project too, I think.
Healthcare.gov.
Yikes.
Yeah, so I was just going to ask a random question in terms of, if anyone's read past part 1, don't answer this. but those that haven't, who thinks that Maxine is going to go for lunch with Sarah?
Oh, this is a great question,
That
because
is a great question.
I have put myself in her shoes and think a lot about like how many, I never turned down an offer for lunch by a woman with more experience than me, period. I think like even people who I have not built long-term mentoring relationships with, I think I certainly would go to lunch if I were Maxine.
She's paying.
Even
Yeah. My read is, I mean, yeah, meeting people, right? It's always a learning opportunity. So that part in itself is just a good idea, I think, generally. How I would actually read this particular situation, and I think she even kind of hints at it, is it's not in my court, it's in her court. Like if she contacts me and then we go to lunch, okay, but I'm not going to be the one trying to reach out to her. And I might be reading through between the lines, but I feel like that was the vibe.
Yeah, I think that was the vibe that she gave. I think that the only thing I would say is that it was very much Sarah. It was like, we should grab lunch sometime. So I'd say the ball's really in Maxine's court, really. But yeah.
Yeah, I read it the other way, that like Maxine doesn't want to get lunch. So my read is that she's going to get pressured into it. That Sarah's just going to like jump down her throat and just drag her out the door. So that's my guess.
It's a high. Sorry, jumping on your line.
No, you're good. Go ahead.
I think it's a high stakes situation for her because she really does not want to lie to Sarah. And if she is brutally honest, this might or might not be taken well in this type of organization. And she thinks like, is this something which can potentially get me out of the job or jumpstart my career here in some different role? Even in terms of increasing her range of what she's saying, giving her a powerful ally to maybe change things she knows they don't work.
The only thing I would say about that is that the reason why she was invited to lunch in the first place is because she did speak her mind and she was
exactly, yeah.
And Sarah is definitely the villain in the way she's framed in the book, but if we step back, I think it's just logical to recognize like she doesn't understand what she's asking of other people, but she's not here to see the company go under, right? Like at the end of the day, her intentions are good and she feels like she's doing what she needs to motivate or get results. We can see that it's not effective because we have this omniscient power and maybe we've been in those situations before. But I do think it's important to recognize that Sarah's intention here is, even though she's not going about it in a way that I think is effective or useful or even beneficial to anyone, at the end of the day, like, I don't think she's trying to see Parts Unlimited fail. Like, her intentions are good.
I feel like she's got very self-motivated intentions. I'm not so sure she cares about the company.
Even from
that's fair, but still, what Emily
even
says.
In Phoenix Project.
I'm very much with you, Emily, in a way that I have a feeling Sarah is an archetypical business user who does not necessarily understand what's going under the hood, but she's very tired with the lack of transparency of the whole thing that the technology department is. And on the other hand, she's ambitious. She wants success in her role. And she thinks about IT as a hindrance on the way to achieve that.
Didn't she have a huge power struggle as well in Phoenix Project?
She did, and I don't want to say that like thing that happened or like that becomes a thing in case it comes up in the book, but she does do some things that they evaluate options for Parts Unlimited. If that's where you're getting at, Brad, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, because I was both from the Phoenix Project and and seeing her role. They're the same role, right? She's the same person.
Yeah.
And she plays a role in both. And I just remember, I don't remember the specifics, but I remember Phoenix Project having her really, really struggling for power, especially against Bill, right? Bill was the IT CIO or whatever, right?
Yeah, there's definitely a power struggle. There's a lot of like very clear kind of power grabs or land grabs, I guess you would say, where she sees the opportunity to seize influence and she tries to do that. But I don't think, I guess my thought is just that her intentions, even if they are self-serving, even if her goal is to be the CEO of Parts Unlimited, I think underlying that is like there's still got to be a Parts Unlimited for her to be CEO of. And so she can't actively want the downfall of the org. And that's one thing just to keep in mind. I think you explained it really well, Mikal, when you said she's the business user who just doesn't know any better.
I would agree with that.
So with that in mind, does that change your perspective on the will she go to lunch question?
I think, personally, if I was in her situation, I would go to lunch with her, if nothing else, just to hear what she's got to say, because I think you're always in a better position if you're informed and you've listened to all the options. But, well, okay, if I'm actually placing my bet now as to whether she will, I don't reckon she will.
I'm just surprised that she didn't make the realization in the bar of maybe she can use Sarah's influence to get Kurt that position as the head of a team or the head of development. Like I was waiting for that aha moment of like, oh, I can go, talk to that SVP who wanted to talk to me and see if I can't get her to help weigh in on this.
But now, are you saying that from a perspective of somebody who read the whole book or just part one?
Nope, I finished part one this morning at like 4 a.m.
Okay, that's relieving. Then that's not a spoiler.
Last minute swatting, we like it.
So I'm curious as we start to, I know we're getting close to time. What did people think about the 5 ideas, at least based on the cursory glance that Eric gave us at this point?
Say when during the all hands or the keynote or whatever it was, they talked about the safety in the plant. And as soon as I read that, I was like, oh, psychological safety is totally coming up later. And that's what triggered me to think like, oh, this is all a book about Accelerate, because that's a key component of that book as well. So, I mean, it's great stuff. Like, love it. Yeah.
For me, it wasn't like anything new, and I imagine that's probably pretty similar to everybody. It's like there's always good ideas. Sometimes you need to get reminded of them, but it's like not anything that new.
I'm interested to see how they're going to apply them. But yeah, I mean, the third idea, especially the improvement of daily work, like that's just like in terms of reducing technical debt and stuff. That's I'm just interested to see how that's all going to play in.
They're all interrelated, but it's not accidental that they are in this order, right? You can't implement them backwards.
Oh, you're right. They're very much in a very specific order, I feel.
Cool insight.
Yeah, I mean, to Derek's point, I mean, it does remind me sort of how grateful I am that, sort of Aussie GitLab embodies a lot of these principles. And it's easy to forget that until you like read the book reviews. The people are like, oh, this is my company now. And I'm like, oh gosh, can you imagine like being in that toxic environment and reading this and being like, oh gosh, I gotta either get out or hopefully change this.
I mean, I guess the hope of the book is actually that people will read it, will realize that they are in environments not that dissimilar than this, and that the hope is that it will embody them to change their environment. And
yeah, it just makes me grateful that I'm already out of that.
Yeah, like when I read the Phoenix Project, it was a number of years ago, and that really was the reality for so many of the life I was living, right? It was like it hit home. It was so realistic. And now the Unicorn Project comes, and I actually felt kind of the inverse. Like I said in the beginning, I was like, oh my God, there's such a better way, right? Where in the Phoenix Project, I was like, yeah, that's me. Like I couldn't wait to get to the end to figure out how to fix it. Where now it's like I already know what the fix is. Like it's it's implement GitLab or it's whatever, right? It's I'm like I already know the answer. Like come on, hurry up and do it. So I came to it from 2 different life experiences.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I would love to say that GitLab is the answer to all of the problems in the book, but I do think that some maybe not. So like the teams and the collaboration and stuff, I think there's, it's foundational stuff that you need to get in there right from the word go.
It would be a ton of work, but I would be so interested to see GitLab put out kind of like a parallel, like GitLab's response to the Unicorn project, and just say like, because I mean, there was even a section in there where they're like, our tools don't even talk to each other. The project tool doesn't talk to the dev tool. I'm like, oh my god, that's such our value prop. And it was one of those things that it was like, I would love for us to sit there and break it down, like have marketing go through and just go.
So like, you want a case study or a white paper released called the Tanuki Project.
Yes,
I like it.
I think someone needs to open an issue.
It sounds like a great idea.
Okay,
and it's just our response too.
So we're at time, but before we break, I just wanted to ask the question. So part 2 is chapter 8 through 13. It's page 116 to 224. Does it make more sense to read like the whole part before the next call? Or should we stick to just the chapters?
So actually, I think I updated it so that we are reading the whole parts. Someone made that suggestion originally.
Yeah, I'd go for parts.
Yeah. So everything's in parts now. So there's only 3 meetings. We can do a optional 4th one if people want to like recap or whatever, but yep.
Beautiful.
Maybe we should do a 4th one when Derek's read the Phoenix Project.
I have it right here.
Very good. Very good.
All right. Thanks.
Well, thanks everybody.
See ya.
See you next time.
Thanks.
Bye.